The image many Australians still have of Indonesia, our neighbour with a massive population of 250 million, is still dominated by headline-grabbing slogans about terrorism or drugs and holidays in Bali. But Kevin Rudd made Indonesia his first overseas trip since being reinstated as Prime Minister. So how crucial is Indonesia to Australia, both as a trading partner and a firm regional ally and friend? A close observer of just how important this relationship should be is Dr Ross Tapsell. He's lecturer at the College of Asia and the Pacific at the Australian National University, and he joins us in our Canberra studio. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Helen.
Now, Dr Tapsell, what do you think, before we get on to the broader relationship, what do you think was actually achieved in the talks between Kevin Rudd and President Yudhoyono? Was it just an attempt to make asylum seeker policy a true national approach to it, or was there progress on trade and deepening our relationship?
Oh, look, I think the government went in there to try and improve trade and have some broader issues. I noticed that they put out a report of future vision of Indonesia till 2025. So I think that the plan, as they usually are in these bilateral meetings, is to talk about the great friendships and the future of their relationship and the importance of the relationship. So I think that was there. But obviously there's the concern that we don't want to just hinge the relationship just on the issue of the day or the issue of the election, and that is boats. So I think the government realises that, and hopefully there's opportunities for growth in that relationship.
Well, just before we move on, I mean, the government was trying to hose down expectations about some magic outcome to this issue of people who get on boats. But were you surprised how committed President Yudhoyono seemed to be to having a regional approach and saying it was as much Indonesia's responsibility as Australia's?
Yeah, but the interesting thing is, I mean, President Yudhoyono won't be the president by next year. His term is coming to an end, and we don't want to judge that perhaps in the next president, if the issue becomes a domestic issue, it could be very important for that president. At the moment, it's not really making big news in Indonesia. The newspapers aren't really covering the boat issue. It's not a big concern. They're a bit more concerned with neighbours Malaysia and Singapore, and Hayes has been in the news recently, blowing back to Singapore. But if this is becomes a concern domestically for a new president, then this could easily turn into a bigger issue domestically. But at the moment, President Yudhoyono is doing what he's been doing for a number of years, and that's being very polite.
All right, well, if we go beyond that election issue, as you called it, how successful do you think Australia's relationship is with Indonesia at present, both on a government level and on a business level?
Yes, I noticed that the Trade Minister spoke today, and he was talking about the future trade with Indonesia. Obviously, that's a big part of the relationship. Look, the relationship with Indonesia is a complex one, and one of the things I think that we need to take into account is that we're going to be needing to work with Indonesia on a lot of issues in the future. Issues of climate change, issues to deal with China rising in the region, issues, of course, of immigration. So we do want to think of Indonesia as an equal partner at the table and an important partner in some of these issues to do with negotiation. The concern I have is more to do with domestically, are we looking at Indonesia in the right way? Indonesian language is dropping in schools and universities. Is our understanding and knowledge of Indonesian issues as good as it could be? And that's an important part of any relationship, that general level of understanding.
Yeah, we'll talk about that language issue and things like that a bit later. But we do already have quite deep ties and trade with Indonesia. In fact, I mean, many Australians might be surprised to learn that Indonesia is the biggest export market in the world, buying our wheat and grain. That's a quiet success story that's very, very valuable to Australia, isn't it?
It is. The Trade Minister today was talking a lot more about moving beyond and trying to get new initiatives into the Indonesian region. Obviously, a lot of young people in Indonesia, I think under 50% of Indonesia are under 40 at the moment. So there's opportunities to build this relationship beyond commodities and wheat and so on. And I think that's going to be an important part for Australia in the future.
Where do you see this relationship headed in the next 10 years? You mentioned that, we need Australia Indonesia as a good partner next to us to deal with issues like climate change and also the changing relationship of China in our region?
Yeah, so I think, again, it is important not to just hinge the relationship on the issue of the day. The government has been saying, successive governments have been saying since the mid-90s that we need to build people-to-people relations, that's such a crucial part of our relationship with Indonesia. At a higher level, yes, there seems to be great friendship between presidents and prime ministers, but are we building deeper people-to-people relations between Indonesia and Australia?
Well, are we? You've been watching it for some time.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk about these things, and the recent report that came out, the Future Vision till 2025, mentioned a couple of things which have been pretty good, such as the Youth Exchange Program, Muslim Exchange Program, but I think we could be doing a lot more on this, and that does concern me. And I note in Indonesia today they said that report was a bit like a McKinsey-style report with some nice pictures and so on, but there wasn't a lot of depth there about the key issues, such as, say, for example, people-to-people relations, Papua, climate change. The report kind of skimmed over a lot of these things.
Yeah, Dr Tapsell, in your view, is Australia's response sometimes to Indonesian affairs often perhaps emotional, also a little bit suspicious, rather than a rational and a kind of having a vision about where we need to go with our neighbour?
Yeah, that is a big concern, isn't it? And obviously these issues are important domestically, politically at the moment. And sometimes you do think this is quite an emotive response rather than a rational, coherent strategy with a future vision. And I think that's the key aspect, I think, for the future of Indonesia, for the future of Indonesia-Australia relations. Are we looking at a strategic, visionary strategy for what could be our most important ally in the region?
But, I mean, there is some justification on Australians' part, isn't there? The Indonesians themselves acknowledge there is still widespread corruption. There are still problems they have with terrorism, those sorts of issues that do make Australians uneasy.
Look, yeah, none of this is to say that Indonesia's perfect. I mean, certainly there's problems, and my research specifically looks at problems particularly to do with, say, media freedom, ownership of media, restrictions of media into Papua, these kind of things. So, yeah, none of this is to say that Indonesian democracy is perfect. But it's a young democracy, it's a democracy that's growing. It's a democracy that we need to support. We want to see Indonesia do well, and to do that we're going to have to work closely with Indonesia and treat them on an equal level. We're going to need to be equal partners at the negotiation table and understand the issues that are important to Indonesia, and that takes, speaking the language importantly and learning a bit more about what are the key issues in Indonesian politics, society and culture.
Yeah, so talking about that language, how has the decline of Indonesian studies in schools and at universities here affected our relationship with Indonesia?
Yeah, I think it is a big concern, and I think if you look at the drop-off, since about '96, a steady decline, particularly in schools, a steady decline of Indonesian. It didn't just decline since the Bali bombings. It wasn't just a complete drop-off then. It's actually a steady decline. So I do worry about the understanding that we have, say, on cattle issues, for example, a live cattle dispute. We're worried about are we really discussing that relationship in a clear, coherent manner and understanding the issues to do with live cattle, for instance, refrigeration.
Yeah. So, of course, that's a huge issue that still has to be worked through.
Indeed, and to do that, we're going to have, as I said, greater people-to-people relations, better language policies, and generally speaking, a good understanding of the Indonesian politics, society, history and culture. And I think that's this broader level of seeing the relationship is really the key. It's not just about boats.
All right, Dr Ross Tapsell, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Helen.